In the vast anonymity of the internet, a screen name could be anything you want and anyone you want. In 2005, two provocative handles met in a chat room. Quote, TalHotBlond and quote, Marine Sniper. Their online flirtation crackled with excitement. But unlike most cyber romances, this one would escalate from harmless fantasy to fatal reality. It's a tale of deception, obsession, and consequences. The kind that makes you wonder who really is on the other side of the screen. Who is out there? Comment below, please. But anyway, our story unfolds in 5 acts, a modern tragedy born in cyberspace. This is the TalHotBlond case, an online love triangle that ended in blood. And it all begins with an ordinary man leading an extraordinary double life. Welcome to Creepalachia. Tonight, I want us to settle in to Cyberland. This is a crazy story, and it literally took place in my backyard. But if you don't know it, don't Google it. Listen to the whole thing. And there's actually a documentary called TalHotBlond that I highly recommend you watch after watching this video. And one more thing, before we get started, can you please like this video, subscribe to Creepalachia on YouTube, and also if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, make a note to review your experience right after this. It takes a couple minutes at the most and does so much good for the show. I can't even explain, but I really appreciate it. Now, let's get started with Act 1. Before the tragedy, before the heartbreak, before the twist no one saw coming, there was just a man in a dark room typing to a girl he'd never met. To outsiders, Thomas Montgomery was wallpaper. Mid-40s, soft-spoken, 2 kids, a worn groove in the recliner. He worked second shift at a precision tool factory in Clarence, New York, where sparks flew but conversation didn't, to say the least. He taught Sunday school, played the occasional game of online poker. He had a dog, a wife, and absolutely nothing interesting going on. But like a lot of men who feel like the best parts of life are in the rearview, Tom was simmering quietly, desperately. He'd served in the U.S. Marines decades earlier, but that might as well have been someone else's life. Now, he spent his nights at a beat-up family computer in the basement, where an internet connection became a time machine. Online, Tom transformed. He wasn't the guy hauling parts at Dynabraid anymore. He was, quote, Marine Sniper, rugged, dangerous, 18, a red-haired heartthrob with a chiseled jaw, a dead-eye shot, and a clean slate. He even had the credentials, a real photo from his boot camp days, taken back when Tommy wasn't alive yet. And then came her screen name, TalHotBlond. It was less of a username and more of a warning shot. She introduced herself as Jessie, an 18-year-old high school senior from West Virginia. She played softball, favored tank tops, and had the kind of long legs and coy smile that sent a 46-year-old man into a spiral of nostalgia and lust. And she wasn't shy. Jessie knew how to flirt. She mailed pictures, real ones, of herself. She sent love letters. At one point, even a pair of red panties. She didn't just flirt back. She went first, hard. Now, from the jump, it was digital crack for Tommy. She called him her Marine. She swooned over his tales from Iraq. Fictional tales, but she didn't know that. She told him she loved him. He responded in kind, and at night, with his wife and daughters upstairs, Thomas whispered sweet nothings into a keyboard like a teenage boy who had never been hurt. The relationship became everything. He bought her gifts, and somewhere along the way, he stopped pretending it was pretend. He was in love. It was delusional. It was sad. But most of all, it was real to him. And at work, no one had a clue. Not even Brian Barrett, 22 years old and quiet as a Sunday morning. Brian was a part-time college student and worked the same factory floor as Tom. He was tall, athletic, sweet-natured, and about the only guy in the place who had a shot with someone like Jessie, if Jessie were real, of course. Which, of course, everyone believed she was. Brian and Tom got along well. They talked sports, swapped jokes, but at some point, Jessie started messaging Brian too. And Tom noticed. The light in the basement began to dim. The jealousy, the obsession, the feeling that maybe Jessie wasn't his alone anymore. It started to gnaw at him. Because remember, Tommy wasn't just a fantasy. He was Thomas's future, his second chance, his rebirth. And now someone a quarter century younger was edging in on that fantasy. So he started to simmer again, not just in real life, but online. Because as far as Thomas Montgomery was concerned, love was war. And this time, he wasn't just playing pretend. It started with a flirty message in a teen chat room, and it escalated into a digital affair with dog tags, lingerie, and war stories. But underneath it all, nobody was who they claimed to be, not even close. Now, by the time TalHotBlond hit send on her first message to Marine Sniper, the stage was already set. The chat room was hosted on Pogo.com, a gaming site where card games came with sidebars full of strangers and screen names that sounded like softcore novels. Thomas Montgomery claimed he landed there by accident, said he was just looking to blow off some steam with some online poker. But let's be honest, nobody stumbles into a teen chat room with a handle like Marine Sniper without knowing they're looking for more than just your typical game of spades. That night in May 2005, Montgomery introduced himself as Tommy, an 18-year-old Marine, fresh out of boot camp, jacked, honorable, with bright red hair and a heart made for wartime letters and high school romance. Now, when Jessie challenged his age, since the profile said 46, Tom played it off. That's my dad's account. And just like that, 46-year-old father of two became a teenage war hero. No questions asked. And Jessie? Jessie was the kind of teenage dream Montgomery hadn't even had since the 80s. She said she was 18, a high school senior, a softball player, and judging from the photos she sent, and yes, she sent a lot of them, she was exactly what her screen name promised. Tall, hot, and blonde. Her picture showed a beautiful, athletic woman with beachy hair and an easy smile that made men twice her age get creepy, I guess, and decide to enter chat rooms. But the photos were real too. No filters, no AI. AI was far from existing yet, and no suspicion, at least not from Montgomery. The two became inseparable. Virtually, anyway. They constantly chatted, often deep into the night. Emails turned into love notes. Love notes turned into care packages. Jessie even sent a pair of red lace panties in the mail, which is disgusting. But Thomas responded with a Marine t-shirt, custom dog tags, and, quote, Tommy's favorite snack foods. It wasn't just cyber love anymore. It was a full-blown relationship lived through a screen. And it was hot, to say the least. They talked about sex a lot. Jessie called him her Marine. He called her baby. They told each other, I love you, exchanged fantasies, plotted their future. Montgomery even claimed to be deployed in Iraq, sending dramatic updates about his missions, his near-death experiences, and how he longed to hold her again, even though he never held her the first time. But he wrote like he was bleeding on the keyboard. In one of the many letters Jessie mailed him, she wrote, quote, I love you always and forever, Tommy. You're my hero, my soulmate, my everything, end quote. Montgomery ate it all up, hook, line, and dog tags. Meanwhile, reality was dissolving. He began to live more as Tommy than Thomas. So much so that he wrote himself a note, a kind of psychological rebranding. It read as, quote, on January 2nd, 2006, Tom Montgomery ceases to exist and is replaced by an 18-year-old battle-scarred Marine who is moving to West by God, Virginia. I added the by God, to be with the love of his life, end quote. Now that's not a metaphor. That's a handwritten manifesto he kept next to his desk. Thomas wasn't having a midlife crisis. He was staging a full-blown identity coup. And while this fantasy unfurled, the real world didn't pause to check his pulse. His wife Cindy was upstairs raising their 2 daughters, watching him disappear deeper and deeper into the glow of the computer screen. Now to her, he was becoming someone else. Detached, distracted, and strangely energized for a man who hadn't changed his routine in a decade. But for Thomas, this wasn't just a fling. Jessie made him feel young again, wanted, interesting. She called him brave. She told him he mattered. And the more she fed that identity, the more real it became to him. He didn't just love her, he needed her. She was oxygen. She was an escape route from mediocrity. And she was something else too, a fantasy that listened. One that didn't laugh at his gut or his garage job. One that looked like everything his real life didn't. And she was talking to someone else. But we're not quite there yet. For now, Thomas still believed he was Tommy, and Jessie was still the girl he dreamed about every night. It was love, even if it was all built on a house of cards. Spoiler alert, there's 2 men in love with the same girl. One had a fake name, one had a real chance. More on that shortly, but neither of them knew just how far this fantasy had gone off the rails. Now, by early 2006, the online romance between Marine Sniper and TalHotBlond had gone from a steamy sideshow to an all-consuming obsession. Thomas Montgomery, or Tommy, as he insisted on being known, wasn't just flirting anymore. He was fantasizing about marriage, making babies, and a new life in West by God, Virginia. This wasn't a fling with a teenager. This was destiny. His redemption arc. His second shot at youth, lust, and meaning. But the fantasy had overstayed its welcome, to say the least, and reality was about to make itself known in the form of Cindy Montgomery, Thomas's wife, who had been watching her husband slowly drift into a glowing late-night haze of secrecy and smirks and nasty red panties. But one day, she intercepted a package addressed to Tommy. Inside, photos of a teenage girl in provocative poses. There was a thong in there. And handwritten letters signed with lipstick kisses. Cindy didn't just blow up. She struck back with style. She gathered the photos, printed out one of the family's Christmas portraits, and sent everything back to Jessie's West Virginia address. Her message was short and devastating. Quote, "This is Tom. He is 47 years old. He is married. He has 2 children. You've been lied to," end quote. And just like that, the illusion shattered. The man Jessie thought was an 18-year-old war hero was actually a balding father of 2 with a mortgage and a marriage on the edge of a collapse. Although it pretty much collapsed a while ago. But you'd think that would be the end of it. A humiliating full stop, but Jessie didn't disappear. In fact, she kept messaging Thomas. The tone changed, less, quote, "I love you," more, quote, "How could you," end quote. But she was still there, still present, still emotionally involved, and then things got a little weirder because Jessie had been talking to Brian Barrett. Yes, that Brian we mentioned way earlier, the 22-year-old co-worker who worked side by side with Thomas at the Dinah Braid factory, who had once been a background extra in this online Pogo.com drama. Brian was smart, soft-spoken, and normal in all the ways Thomas envied. He was everything Thomas used to be, or thought he was, back when he was actually 18. No one's quite sure who initiated the new conversation, Jessie or Brian, but once they connected, things moved fast. Now, according to messages later recovered, Jessie and Brian started flirting almost immediately. She told him about her past relationship with Tommy. She painted herself as a betrayed girl who had been lied to by an old creep. Now, Brian, ever the gentleman, was sympathetic. And Thomas, he lost it. He watched, powerless, as the woman of his digital dreams moved on and took her panties elsewhere. To someone real. Someone young, someone within driving distance of her high school, allegedly. It didn't help that Jessie was more than happy to fan the flames. She let it slip that Brian wasn't saying nice things about her at work, that he might be bragging. She told Thomas that Brian said he was the real man in her life now, and Thomas, already unstable, turned from heartbroken to furious. Things got ugly at work. Thomas and Brian still clocked in on the same floor, still exchanged small talk, but now there was a quiet war playing out in the break room. Brian reportedly started printing out his online chats with Jesse and leaving them on Thomas's toolbox. A middle school move in a very adult rivalry. Coworkers began to notice. Whispers swirled. Grown men were fighting over a teenager in a chat room. It got crazy. But Montgomery, he felt humiliated, trapped. He sent Jesse a long message pleading with her to stop, to make it all go away. Quote, "Half the company knows. You've embarrassed me. I've gave you everything." End quote. But she didn't back off. She reminded him that he lied first, that he started all of this, that Brian was at least honest. In a final, desperate exchange, Thomas confronted her again. He said, quote, "You told him I was a predator. You made me into a joke," end quote. Now her response was soft, almost apologetic. Quote, "I'll get out of your life, Tom. I've done too much damage. I'm so sorry," end quote. Now these texts were way more explicit, and I highly recommend you watch TalHotBlond, the documentary, if you want to know the specifics. But this is a family show, people. We ain't gonna put these wordy dirds on here, but man, Tommy lets them fly. Now Jesse's apology unfortunately came too late, because for Thomas Montgomery, Marine Sniper wasn't just a screen name anymore. It was who he believed he was. And Brian Barrett wasn't just a coworker. He was the enemy, the real-world threat to a fantasy Thomas couldn't let go of. At some point, the heartbreak calcified into rage. The notes became darker, the chats more intense, and Thomas, formerly just a sad guy with a double life, began to plan. Not a breakup, not a confrontation, something final. And when he looked at Brian across the factory floor, all he saw was the man who'd stolen everything. The girl, the story, the fantasy, and now all he needed was a way to take it back. It started with love notes, and it ended with a bullet to the neck. And no one saw it coming, not even the one who pulled the trigger. By late summer 2006, the wires between truth and delusion had fully short-circuited inside Thomas Montgomery's mind. His online affair with TalHotBlond had gone from fantasy to obsession, and now humiliation. The woman he believed was his teenage soulmate had moved on, not just emotionally, publicly. Brian Barrett, 22, a college student and part-time factory worker, was now in Jesse's orbit. Younger, sharper, and devastatingly real. He'd become the very thing Montgomery was pretending to be. And worse, he worked just a few feet away on the same factory floor. Co-workers noticed the tension. They heard the rumors. Some even saw the printouts. Brian was reportedly leaving transcripts of his flirty chats with Jesse right on Montgomery's toolbox. A not-so-subtle quote, "I won." And Montgomery? He stewed in it. Shift after shift, fake marine fantasies burning off in the fluorescent light of a factory floor. Now, to the outside world, it looked petty. But to Thomas Montgomery, it was war. Brian hadn't just stolen a girl. He'd stolen Tommy. The fantasy self that Montgomery had believed he sacrificed his dignity and marriage to become. And in Montgomery's mind, one thing had to happen next. Eliminate the rival. September 15th, 2006. It was a Friday night, cool, quiet, unremarkable. Brian finished his shift at Diner Braid around 10 p.m., said his goodbyes, and walked across the parking lot to his red pickup truck. He never made it home. A gunman, crouched in the shadows, likely waiting, approached. 3 shots, point blank. 1 to the neck, 2 to the chest. No words, no warning, no chance to survive. Brian slumped forward in his seat, keys still in the ignition, blood soaking the cab. The shooter disappeared into the dark. His truck sat there for 2 days, parked under a lonely light pole while weekend shifts came and went. On Sunday, A coworker grew suspicious, approached, opened the door, and found the body. The town of Clarence, New York went into shock. Brian wasn't some sketchy guy with enemies. He was a college kid, quiet, well-liked, but as detectives dug into his life, one detail stood out like a red flag with a Wi-Fi signal. He'd been tangled up in an online love triangle with another man who just happened to be missing. That man, Thomas Montgomery. Police searched his house. He was gone. But what he left behind painted the clearest portrait of motive imaginable. Hundreds of pages of chat logs with Jesse, letters, photos, even gifts, a pair of red panties from Jesse, tucked neatly into a drawer. And the most disturbing, a handwritten note proclaiming that on January 2nd, 2006, Tom Montgomery ceased to exist and was replaced by an 18-year-old Marine named Tommy. Also missing, a .30 caliber rifle. Investigators feared the worst, that Montgomery, having eliminated his rival, was now headed south to West Virginia, where he believed Jessie, the girl he loved, waited for him. They scrambled to warn the police in Oak Hill. They put out alerts. They hoped to stop another tragedy before it happened, but Montgomery was found before he could go anywhere else, arrested without incident, rifle in tow. Forensics later confirmed it was the same weapon that killed Brian Barrett. The bullets matched. The motive screamed from every page of the chat logs. Now, faced with overwhelming evidence and the anticipation of a first-degree murder trial, Montgomery pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter in 2007. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, the maximum allowed under the plea. He apologized in court, said it was a mistake, a moment of madness. But by then, the fantasy had already written itself in blood. Brian Barrett was dead, shot over a girl he'd never met. And somewhere in West Virginia, Jessie, the blonde at the center of this story, still hadn't come forward, still hadn't explained. So detectives went to find her. And what they discovered behind that front door would flip this entire story inside out. Because Jessie was real, just not in the way anyone, least of all Thomas Montgomery, ever imagined. The fantasy was gone. The body was cold. The killer in cuffs. But the biggest lie? She was still sitting behind a screen, watching the world she created burn. Now, by the time Thomas Montgomery was led into a courtroom in handcuffs, the country had already absorbed the headline. A man murdered his coworker over a teenage girl he met online. The pieces seemed to fit. Tragic? Yes. Unusual? Sure. But in the age of chat rooms and screen names, it wasn't hard to imagine a lonely man being seduced by a flirty teenager with a keyboard and a webcam. Except two things didn't make sense. That webcam was never turned on, first off, but throughout the entire investigation, the obsession, the chats, the gifts, the murder, the skanky panties, there was one person whose voice was strangely absent. Jessie. She never came forward, never gave a statement, never posted a tearful MySpace update. Remember that? The boy was dead. Another man had thrown away his life, and the girl at the center of it all, nowhere to be found. So detectives did what any rational human would do. They got in a car and drove to Oak Hill in West Baghdad, Virginia, to the address listed on all the love letters and the care packages and skanky panties. The same address where Jessie had once mailed a pair of those skanky panties to a man old enough to be her father. They knocked on the door, expecting to find a devastated teenager. Instead, they found Mary Sheeler, a middle-aged woman. Mom haircut, quiet neighborhood, nothing unusual except for the fact that she was the one who had been catfishing everyone from the start. You heard that right. Jessie was never Jessie. She was Mary, the mother of Jessie. For over a year, Mary Sheeler had posed as her own teenage daughter online, using her photos, her name, even sending her daughter's videos and clothing to strangers. She carried on a sexual, emotionally manipulative relationship with not one, but two men, all while her daughter, the real Jessie, was completely unaware. Lord bless her. Now, when confronted by police, Mary confessed, told them it had started off as innocent. quote, just chat, and escalated from there. At no point did she think it would lead to murder, but it did. A man was dead, another was in prison, and her daughter's image had been used to bait them both. The psychological profile that followed was chilling. Mary was described by some as lonely, bored, maybe even addicted to the attention. But make no mistake, this wasn't naivete. This was premeditated manipulation, and it left real bodies in its wake. Mary had played both sides. She gave Jesse's love to Thomas Montgomery. Then, when the illusion cracked, she turned to Brian, playing the role of the heartbroken teen, luring him in too. She flirted, teased, triangulated, and when she saw the tension rise between the two men, she let it happen. At no point did she say, I'm not who you think I am. Those ain't my skanky pants. Not even after Montgomery's wife exposed the truth and sent photos of the real family to her doorstep. Not even after threats began flying and workplace drama spilled into real life. And instead of Pogo.com, she kept the game going until someone ended it with a rifle. And it was Tommy. In the end, Mary Sheeler was never charged. Let that sink in. She used her daughter's identity. She sent underwear through the mail. She initiated sexually explicit chats. She fanned the flames between two men, one of whom she knew had violent tendencies, and yet no crime on the books fit. In 2006, catfishing wasn't illegal. Using someone's photos, names, their persona, even if it's your own child's, didn't carry criminal penalties if you didn't directly commit the crime. And so, Mary walked. She gave a few statements to the media, mostly vague, mostly defensive. At one point, she reportedly expressed interest in writing a book about the, quote, dangers of the internet. Let that irony marinate for a little bit. Now, as for the real Jessie, Mary's daughter, she was blindsided. She had no idea her mother had been using her identity to sexually manipulate strangers. Now, once the truth came out, she cut off contact completely. The relationship between them never recovered. Mary's husband divorced her, and in Oak Hill, she became the pariah behind the profile. She soon moved. Meanwhile, behind bars in New York, Thomas Montgomery finally met the truth face to face. Jessie had never been real. She was replaced with Large Marge, and he had fallen in love with a woman who didn't exist. He had killed for her. In a prison interview years later, Montgomery admitted, quote, I was duped. I let my emotions take over. I made the ultimate mistake, and I will live with that forever, end quote. Now, he was eligible for parole in 2023. As of now, he remains incarcerated. Brian Barrett never saw the twist, never knew that the girl he was messaging wasn't a girl at all. He thought he was caught up in a romantic rivalry, a bizarre tangle of love and lies. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was the deadliest person in the whole story was the one who never stepped into the spotlight. So here's the truth. Tommy never existed. Jessie never existed, as it was typed. But the consequences were very, very real. A young man is dead. A father is in prison. And a woman who lit the match and watched the fire grow, she walked away untouched. In a world where you can be anyone, where screen names say more than real ones often, and a photo can get you killed, this story isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a cold reminder that you don't have to pull the trigger to destroy someone. Sometimes all you need is Wi-Fi. That'll do it this evening for this story of TalHotBlond. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's very depressing, but also insane that these things go on in our world. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to Creepalachia if you haven't, and leave a comment below about your experience watching this. What can I do better? I appreciate you being here. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, be sure to take a minute or two and leave a review about your experience. Those reviews really help the show's SEO and will help us get found and continue to grow and to continue to tell these depressing stories of Appalachia. But everyone else, always remember, above all else, long live Appalachia.